The Devils by Joe Abercrombie is the first of his work I've read beyond the original First Law Trilogy, and while it's been a minute since I've read anything by Lord Grimdark himself, The Devils was definitely a fun reintroduction to his writing. Like First Law, The Devils is a dark fantasy and honestly somewhat of a black comedy centered around a Suicide Squad-style team of devils in service of the church as they try to place a supposed long-lost princess on the serpent throne of Troy and end a historical schism between the Eastern and Western churches. And yes, by Troy, I do mean the central city in the Iliad and of course the nearly 4-hour movie starring Brad Pitt, because unlike First Law, The Devil takes place in an alternate history where Troy never fell to the Greeks, and Carthage's reign never was ended by the Romans, and where the savior of the church was not Jesus Christ, but a woman who has seemingly been reincarnated into the body of a child pope. And yeah, it's kind of a crazy premise, and that's before you factor in the inclusion of fantastical races and monsters like elves, werewolves, and vampires, while including Abercrombie's trademark sorcerers, magicians, and unkillable warriors. And while the world isn't as completely off the rails as The Circle of the World is, it's probably the one I enjoyed more. As someone who loves history, seeing Abercrombie build a world essentially around the idea of what-if moments in history was genuinely entertaining. And personally, I found his allegories to real-world issues such as hypocrisy in religion and discrimination towards races and those of different faiths even more potent in this slightly more analogous world. But I'd also be amiss if I didn't take a second to talk about the artwork in this book, because not only is the hardcover one of my favorites, I mean, that's just so cool, but the character art that we get in this book, from chapter to chapter, is also just such a delight whenever you come across it. It really brings the characters in this book to life even more, getting this professionally done visual of what they're supposed to look like. Returning to the story, while The Devils is told through multiple perspectives, it centers on a girl named Alex, a street thief and con artist who is identified as the long-lost heir to the serpent throne of Troy, the seat of power of the Eastern Church. Alex is discovered by her uncle, Duke Michael, and a quest begins to put Alex on the throne, with the design of her bringing the schism between the two churches, brought to a fever point by Alex's aunt Eudoxia, to an end, and returning Pope Benedicta, again a child rumored to be the reincarnation of the savior, to absolute power in Europe. And while Eudoxia is believed to be dead, placing Alex on the throne is not an easy task, primarily because Eudoxia had 4 sons, all of whom are vying for the throne and eager to secure it. 3 of the 4 sons determine that the easiest way to do that begins with killing Alex, and therefore it falls to a secret sect of the Western Church known as the Chapel of the Holy Expediency, led by another one of our lead characters, Brother Diaz, to ensure Alex's rise to as the Empress of the East is successful. And this is where the Suicide Squad nature of the book begins to take place, as we learn that the Chapel of the Holy Expediency isn't simply a congregation of devotees to the church, but rather a collection of people seen as, well, devils, hence the name of the book. While Brother Diaz is officially in charge, the team is led primarily by a cursed knight named Jacob of Thorn and his second and honestly hilarious jack-of-all-trades with a convoluted past named Baptiste. The rest of the team consists all of condemned enemies of God, forced to aid the Chapel of the Holy Expediency due to an enchantment known as the Papal Binding, and the members of this team include a vampire named Baron Rickard, a necromancer named Balthazar, a werewolf named Viga, and an elf named Sunny. And with the premise in place, I first wanted to talk about what I didn't like so I can get into the weeds about what worked, because for the most part, this book was such a good read. Also, I'm keeping this review spoiler-free, and I'll probably make a spoiler discussion video soon, as there is so much I want to talk about with this book because I really enjoyed it. The first issue I had is more stylistic, I suppose, and I'm not sure if it was as prominent in First Law as it was in this book, but the romantic subplots and sex are prevalent throughout this book to a kind of obsessive degree. I love romance and fantasy. I'll admit I'm a sucker for a good love story, but not only do most of the romance elements in this book feel surface level, they also don't feel particularly impactful, especially considering how the book ends. It's disappointing because a lot of time is spent on them, and the payoff is really not worth it, at least in this first entry. Also, I know dark fantasy as a genre is often more geared towards adults, and yes, adults talk about sex, but I swear to God, not nearly as much as this book would lead you to believe. I'm talking about a reference or a description of it in action on almost every other page. Again, it's fine that it's in there, and even better when the relationship feels well developed, but I really hope that for the sequel, he just tones it down just a bit because it was too much. Like, the only relationship worth spending any time on, in my opinion, was Alex's, and everyone else's just felt like such a waste. My next gripe was that, although I didn't notice it as much in parts 1 and 2, the Devil starts to feel extremely repetitive in its structure by part 3. The team would essentially get somewhere, get trapped by one antagonistic group or another, Jakob would get stabbed, Baptiste would say she should have quit after Barcelona, which I hope we learn something about eventually someday. And then the villain of the day would be defeated, and they'd move on to the following location to do it all over again. And yes, I did enjoy how sometimes it was Vigo who solved the problem, or Rickard, or Balthazar, but it did start to feel repetitive a couple of hundred pages in, which is a shame because the character interactions during this scene were honestly fantastic. I just wish I could have seen them in more various situations. Like, it got to the point where there was a chapter literally called Our Latest Last Stand, poking fun at how repetitive in nature the book can be. And I know this book is not supposed to be as serious as First Law, but it did occasionally slash the tension for me, which is unfortunate. And lastly, while I really grew to love some characters, Rickard, Jakob, Alex, Sonny, and even Balthazar, characters like Vigo or Brother Diaz felt a bit underbaked, and given how the story ends, I do have complete faith that Brother Diaz will become a more dynamic character, especially with how central he seems to be to the rule and administration of Troy. But Vigo, for instance, feels in a lot of ways that she ended the story right where she started it and didn't really have any growth at all. And this is tied slightly to the repetitive nature of the dialogue from the less developed characters that turn them really into flat, one-note caricatures. But enough with the gripes, because if we weighed the positives and the negatives of this book on a scale, the pros vastly outweigh the cons, and I wanted to start with a major one, considering that this book is in many ways a comedy, and that is that the humor hits most of the time. All of the characters have their own gags and their personality, and for almost all of them, they made me laugh. My personal favorite was Baptiste and the reaction everyone had to her many part-time jobs. However, Balthazar constantly referring to himself as a different rank of magician in Europe, and Jakob and Sonny both playing these hilarious straight men to the chaos of the group worked really well. And although I guess Sonny's main gag is being painfully deadpan and finding human reactions to things strange, given that she's an elf, which works, especially when paired with more over-the-top personalities like Diaz or Alex. And despite what I've said about a few of the characters feeling underdeveloped, Abercrombie is without a doubt a masterful character writer. There clearly are trademark archetypes that he likes to work with, as many times I found myself feeling like, oh, this character is sort of like a mix of Glokta and Logan from First Law, or oh, this kind of like is Jazal or Pharaoh. But that isn't to say that characters don't have their own spark in this book. These characters and the way they interact and grow with each other, like Balthazar teaching history to Alex, or his back and forth in philosophy with Baron Rickard, or Alex learning how to read and write from Brother Diaz, all help to develop this really strong found family dynamic that permeates this book and helps us as readers really fall in love with the characters, despite some of them having major flaws. Like, I saw a tagline for this book, which was like, this book really makes you fall in love with literal monsters, and they're 100% right in that, because by the end of the book, when a certain split happens, it leaves you just so eager for the next book to come out so they can all reunite, because the relationships Abercrombie wrote in this book were all outstanding. The characters go through a lot in these pages, and it left me feeling for them, especially around the ending. Even the perspectives I cared less for than others still left a bittersweet taste in my mouth by the time I finished the final chapters, and to me that's really impressive. I've also found that Abercrombie is particularly skilled in writing action scenes. Every battle in this book takes place under some really chaotic circumstances, and depending on if you are reading about the fight from the skilled Jakob of Thorn's perspective, or the battle-lusted Vigo, or the fearful Diaz, their reactions and descriptions of the action all feel meticulously planned. Whereas Jakob might offer a thoughtful and strategic view of the battle, Diaz will be praying in the hopes of not getting killed and darting around the battlefield in a panic. It's not something I've seen in a lot of fantasy that I've read recently, but It really did make the battles come to life on the page and shows how expansive some of these fights are that they get themselves into. And finally, I mentioned it before, but this type of world building is just unique. It immediately captures your attention to your places you know in the real world, like Sicily or Paris, brought up only to be smacked over the head with new lore about what happened to it in this world. Like, Abercrombie certainly had some feelings towards other European countries that he wanted to get off his chest, and hearing his level of detail and the rise and fall of them, like, organically throughout the book was really surprising and honestly pretty amusing. Overall, I'd say if you like Joe Abercrombie, you're going to like The Devils, so long as you understand that this book, while in some ways resembles the First Law series in terms of, like, characters, it's not nearly as gritty or brutally dark. I'd actually imagine that, given what I understand, this book is supposed to be the start of a new trilogy. The Devils might actually be a perfect jumping on point for someone who wants to try something from the mind of Lord Grimdark without getting overwhelmed by his world. The book is humorous, has heart, and the world, while rich, does not feel overwhelming. The power systems lack complexity so far that we've seen from his other works from characters like Baez, but it makes The Devils a far easier book to read and enjoy. And personally, I love The Devils, and I'm excited to read the sequel when it comes out. The book is extremely character-driven, and the plot, especially in the final act, becomes one hell of a ride. I recommended this book to a friend of mine who just finished The Witcher because it gives off a similar vibe, and they seem to be enjoying it for what it's worth, so take that as you will. But after reading Mordu, this book was exactly what I needed, and for the most part, I enjoyed it cover to cover. I also got the audiobook by Stephen Pacey to listen to while I was driving, and if you're someone who likes audiobooks, I highly recommend it because the narration and the character voices he delivers are fantastic. If I had to give this book a rating, I'd probably give it like a 4.5 out of 5. To me, it's nearly perfect, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel. So if you're like me, go to your local bookstore and pick it up. And if you've read it, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Specifically, if you've read First Law, I'd love to know how you feel this book stacks up against The Blade itself as a series kickoff. But with that said, that is all I have for you guys today, and until next time, peace.